Good afternoon. On behalf of the Historical Society of Harford County, welcome to the 2020 George Archer Lecture. Before we begin, please be aware that this event is being recorded and will be made available publicly through the Historical Society webpage and on the Society's YouTube channel. The Historical Society of Harford County was established at the county courthouse in 1885 and is the oldest county historical society in Maryland. The society collects, preserves, and interprets the rich and diverse history of the Harford County area in its regional context and from prehistoric origins to the present, for the education and enjoyment of current and future generations. The Society's headquarters is at 143 North Main Street in Bel Air, and it houses extensive collections of court records, artifacts, books, photos, newspapers, portraits, articles, and written materials by and about the people and places of Harford County. The Archer Lecture is an annual event showcasing original historical research into the history of Harford County. The event is named for George Washington Archer, MD, who lived from 1824 to 1907, a Harford County physician scholar responsible for initiating the assemblage of materials that became the initial archives collection of the Historical Society of Harford County. Our presenter is Douglas Washburn, a native of Harford County and proud graduate of the North Harford High School in Pilesville, Maryland. From North Harford, he went on to graduate from the Johns Hopkins University with a degree in mechanical engineering. He retired after a 34-year career in the telecommunications industry at Western Electric, AT&T, and Lucent Technologies. Doug's interest in the history of Harford County, especially the North Harford area, can be explained by his family heritage. He is the 8th generation Whiteford and 7th generation McFadden in Harford County. His mother was born in the Stansbury Mansion, where her father, Doug's grandfather, was the miller at Eden Mill from 1918 through 1930. Doug and his wife Mary live in Whiteford. Doug is an avid researcher and recognized expert in the history of Northern Harford County. He has authored 4 Harford Historical Bulletins, 2 on 1- and 2-room schools of Northern Harford County, and 2 on the colored schools of Harford County, separate but equal. He has written and published 2 books, A History of Pilesville, Harford County, Maryland, and On the Road from Jarrettsville, Volume 1, The Village of Jarrettsville, which is the subject of this year's Archer Lecture. The event today begins with a recorded lecture. Doug is joining us afterwards to answer questions and provide additional insight into the history of Jarrettsville. If you would like to submit a question, please type it into the chat section on Zoom. You'll find the chat icon on the bottom of your screen. You may have to hover with your cursor at the bottom of your screen to see the little chat icon. With that, let's begin.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoyed the program. On the Road from Jarrettsville is envisioned to be a multi-volume project covering the villages of the Jarrettsville Precinct No. 2 and the Marshall Election District No. 4. Volume 1, published in April of this year, covers the Village of Jarrettsville. The book is now in its 2nd edition with corrections for a 3rd edition already noted. It represents over 4 years of research. The definition of Jarrettsville Precinct that was used is illustrated on Martinet's 1878 map of Harford County. Shawsville on the northwest, Five Forks on the northeast, Forest Hill on the southeast, and Taylor on the southwest. The defined area covers 6 zip codes, most of Jarrettsville, significant parts of Whitehall, Street, and Pilesville, and portions of Moncton and Forest Hill. The minimal goal of the project is to explore the 5 remaining villages, Shawsville, Black Horse, Madonna, Jarrettsville, and Cooptown. Taylor and Federal Hill will make it to print too. And forgotten villages such as Claremont Mills, Sarah Furnace, and Chrome Hill could be explored. The village of Jarrettsville is defined as the intersection of Norrisville, Federal Hill, West Jarrettsville, and Baldwin Mill roads. Volume 1 covered about 1 1/2 miles north, south, east, and west of the village square. Jarrettsville is where I grew up and worked in the 1950s and 60s. I was not convinced that the previous histories of the area were correct because they lacked source citation. Therefore, the goal of this project was to find other sources, and I wanted to tell the story of the village. Jarrettsville Past and Present was published by the Jarrettsville Lions Club in 1976. It's a reasonable assumption that C. Milton Wright's 1967 Our Harford Heritage was more than a starting point for the latter work, and Wright states that most of his content on Jarrettsville was from Lillian Amos Brown's information that had been published in the 1953 Harford County Directory. The previous histories all mention Dine's Lot as the significant land patent located in the village. This was somewhat misleading. To cover the village from Salem Church Road on the west to Anderson Lane on the east, the discussion of land patents must be increased sevenfold. The earliest land patent in the area was to Daniel Scott for James's Forest in 1724. This was to the east of the village around Anderson Lane. Scott then added addition to James's Forest in 1729. This property simplistically was an inverted U wrapping around the original patent. Its western border extended to the intersection that defines the village. Then Dine's Lot was issued to Francis Dine in 1771. 47 years after Scott's arrival. It stretches from the village square to Belmont Drive behind Smith's Ace Hardware. The other 5 patents filling out the area occurred over the next 45 years, taking over 90 years after Scott's arrival. The earliest map of the area is Griffith's 1794 map of Maryland and Delaware. Bone's 1797 map is essentially a copy with a few additions. Of interest for us, Blue Ball, the future Madonna. Both show the Blue Rocks, an earlier name for the Shawsville, Black Horse, and Cooptown, although the first two are incorrectly shown in Baltimore County. A single bar represented a house, so note that Cooptown is the only substantial village in the area at the time. The previous history state, and I agree, that the tavern shown on the map as Dean's was in fact Dine's Tavern that stood on the northwest corner of the village. But note that at the time there was no intersection. The book is organized in typical chapters: schools, churches, businesses, etc. What I'd like to do today is to present the book in chronological order. I hope to bring the village to life for you. Items in light yellow have already been mentioned. The book provides citation for all of these events. The Revolutionary Committee met at Dine's in 1775. Presumably this was at his tavern, but that's not known for sure, as the earliest ordinary or tavern license found was in the 1779 to 81 ledger at the Historical Society. About 1784, Francis Dines died intestate, meaning without representation, that is, without a will. His wife, Mary, was appointed as the administrator for his estate. In 1787, Widow Mary paid deceased Francis £30 for Dine's Lot. Mary had failed to fulfill her duties as the administrator of Francis's estate, and this was apparently how the Register of Wills forced Mary to complete her duties. Mary sold Dine's lot to Samuel Marshall in 1789. In 1796, Amos Carman was born to Andrew Carman. Amos would be the future first postmaster of the village. In 1800, election districts replaced the former military political unit called 100, which was the land required to muster 100 able-bodied men for the militia. District 4 was named for Samuel Marshall, the owner of Dine's Tavern. Also this year, Jane Marshall was the third daughter born to Samuel. She would be the future Mrs. Amos Carman. These are the Jarrettsville namesakes, Luther Martin Jarrett and Julia Ann Scarf. These images appeared in the 1976 Jarrettsville Past and Present publication. Her original portrait and a replica of his portrait done by me hangs in the Jarrettsville branch of the Harford County Public Library. Luther was born in 1804 to Jessie Jarrett. The home farm was today's Elkridge Harford Hunt Club on Pocock Road. Julia was born in 1811 at today's Ladue Topiary Gardens. Before the current Harford County Executive County Council form of government was instituted in 1972, all county business was done in Annapolis. Thanks to Maryland Law 1822-51, passed in January of 1823, we know that Samuel Marshall built a new tavern in 1822. It would later be referred to as the Jarrettsville Hotel. From this law, we can also reasonably speculate that Dine's Tavern had been in the vicinity of the southwest corner of the Keene Dodge building. This speculation only needs to assume that the building would have been near the road. This is the Jarrettsville Hotel, built by Samuel Marshall in 1822, and where Nicholas McComas was murdered by Martha Jane Cairns in 1869. Their story was captured in Cornelia Nixon's novel, Jarrettsville. New York and Harford County newspapers covered Martha Jane's trial, but the topic was not discussed by the locals for decades. The 1822 hotel was located on the southwest corner of the intersection. In 1823, Samuel Marshall died. He left $20 to one daughter, the family Bible to a second daughter, and Jane Marshall, who had married Amos Carman in 1818, inherited everything else, including Dine's lot where the tavern stood. Amos Carman was named as the first postmaster of the village in 1826, and he named the post office Carman's. 3 years later, Benjamin Bradford Amos replaced Amos Carman as the postmaster, and he purchased Dine's lot. In 1830, Luther Martin Jarrett and Julia Ann Scarf married. In 1835, Luther Martin Jarrett became the next postmaster, and he purchased Dine's lot. Also in 1835, this first schoolhouse was built on the northeast corner. It was log. The postmaster was a politically appointed position. Luther Martin Jarrett would serve as the postmaster on 4 occasions, including as the last postmaster of Carman's and the first postmaster of Jarrettsville, which he renamed in 1838. 1839, Luther and Julia bought addition to James's Forest, and at that point they owned all 4 corners of the village square. The 1840 Smith Kurtz house still stands just south of Kurtz's cabinet shop, directly across from North Harford Liquors. It is currently the oldest house in the village. The original roof line ran north and south, that's parallel to Baldwin Mill Road, but it was later altered to run east and west. In 1842, Luther built Jarrett Manor, the grand house that he had promised Julia if she would marry him. Every family that occupied the manor house had Jarrett blood in their veins, but because their property passed via the female line at the end, Jarrett was not on the mailbox. Mogart's Antiques occupied this house in the late 1960s. In its later years, it was the epitome of the 1986 Tom Hanks movie, The Money Pit. This view would be standing in the intersection, and this view would be of the manor standing at the Carroll Fuels car wash. The second log schoolhouse was built on the site of the Jarrettsville Federal Savings and Loan in 1843, and in 1844 the Methodist Episcopal South Church split from the Emmy Church over the issue of slavery. Elsewhere in Harford County, this division was also seen in Dublin. Also in 1844, Martin Kurtz arrived in the village and established the Kurtz Undertaker and Cabinet Making Shop. His 1902 cabinet shop still stands on the east side of Baldwin Mill Road, just south of the village square. In November of 2015, when I started this project, I walked the village with Dr. Arch Phillips, and his recollections of this building included.
Okay, so now we're at the original E.G. Kurtz wood shop.
Yes, and the door to the right, this doesn't look anything like it right now, but if you have an older picture, that door, the furthest to the right, was the entrance to what was the funeral parlor, the first funeral parlor that they had here. And then the shop grew like topsy, and so the building kept taking on new shapes and forms and so forth, and so till it got to be that size. I know that at the time after Martin Kurtz of our generation, of my folks' generation, who would have been a grandson of the original Martin, when he finally, the place was closed, that he quit the wood shop business and the boys didn't take it up, that place was packed with all kinds of furnishings that people had brought to him to repair, furniture, chests, clock cases, you name it, and it all went to auction, including lots of seasoned walnut and cedar lumber and whatnot that they would use for caskets and for furniture. The Kurtzes made absolutely wonderful cedar chests, and virtually everyone in Jarrettsville had a Kurtz cedar chest. We have one. I mean, I in fact, when Millie and I were married, Martin made one for her. And my sister has one. My mother had one. Virtually everybody around here had a Kurtz cedar chest and prized them very highly. And they had rounded corners. The top of them, they were not sharp corners. They were all dovetailed and rounded, and the top is about 4 inches deep. So that it looked almost like a casket, if you want to.
In 1850, the Jarretts sold the property where the Brotherhood Circle Hall would be built. The hall was on the site where the red brick house recently occupied by Jarrettsville Federal Savings and Loan stands. In 1854, at age 50, Luther Martin Jarrett died of a heart attack and intestate. Julia Ann Jarrett and her brother Joshua Henry Scarf were named as administrators. Sometime before 1858, the first general store was built next to the manor on the northeast corner. The location is known from an 1886 deed reference, and the 1858 map of Jennings and Herrick's shows a post office at the location. Post offices were customarily located in a general store. James Kidscarf, another brother of Julia's, bought a tavern house in Jarrettsville in 1859. In part, this settled Luther Martin Jarrett's estate. About 1860, William Bosley Jarrett, a son of Luther and Julia, built a house referred to as Ingleside on the west side of Baldwin Mill Road, just south of modern Ingleside Drive. The Civil War raged from 1861 to 1865. Most of the Jarretts were pro-South. Only their oldest son, James Henry Scarf Jarrett, was pro-North. Many families had sons that fought on opposite sides of this issue, but it was less common that two brothers who were also doctors fought on opposite sides. After the war, James lived out his life in Towson, and Martin returned to Jarrettsville to become one of the village's driving forces, being actively involved in politics, organizations, several business ventures, the Emmy South Church, as well as the village medicine man. In 1867, Reverend Watts came to the village. If there had ever been any hope of the local Emmy South factions resolving their differences, pro-South Watts' arrival sealed the deal. Watts Chapel stood in the graveyard just north of the village square. James Kidscarf died intestate in 1869. An Asbury Emmy Church was established. When Asbury was built, there was significant discussion as to whether it would be Emmy South, or MP, that's Methodist Protestant. In the Cathcart household, the Reverend Thomas M. Cathcart voted MP, Mrs. Cathcart voted ME, and their son, Thomas E., voted ME South. Kurtz moved the funeral home business to this building in 1940, and today it's owned by McComas. In 1871, the Brotherhood Circle Hall was purchased by the school board, and it became the third school in the community. The Jarrettsville Hotel was purchased by Julia Ann in 1876. This in part settled her brother James Kidscarf's estate. This picture would be from a much later time, as the porch was gone. J.C. Taylor started his marble works business in 1878 at the invitation of Martin Kurtz, the local undertaker. His property had been part of Asbury, and the sale provided funds for Asbury's expansion. In 2020, his house is the Subway and North Harford Liquors building. It's seen in this picture on the right. Joseph Eggleston purchased the property between McComas and Flowers by Bowers in 1882. The lot was the location of his house and blacksmith shop, and in 1890, the village's first hardware store. The 1884 Knights of Pythias Lodge was erected on the lot where today's parsonage for the United Methodist Church is located. It was used as the town hall, the school auditorium, and for other local organization meetings. Also in 1884, the Emmy South Church constructed a parsonage. Prior to this time, preachers generally were boarded at the Jarrett Manor. This building was moved to Anderson Lane around 1967. Dr. Martin Luther Jarrett purchased 2 acres from his mother in 1886 on the southeast corner of the village square. And in 1887, the Jarrettsville General Store was built and stocked by Dr. Jarrett. I worked in this store in the early 1960s for the Burge family. Salem Church of the Evangelical Association was erected in 1888. Many of the members were the local German population. It was located at the intersection of Norrisville and Salem Church Roads. It so closely followed the Methodist doctrine that when it closed in 1915, the majority of the congregation joined Calvary. This is my favorite picture in the book. It shows the 1822 hotel porch, the 1887 general store, and the 1889 stable property, which would later be the Sinclair Brothers Motor Company, Harford Gas, which evolved to Southern States, and the original Jarrettsville Pharmacy. In 1890, William Hope Jarrett, a grandson of Luther and Julia, and the son of William Bosley, built a house in the village. It still stands today as Flowers by Bowers. In 1895, Calvary Emmy South replaced Watts Chapel. It was at the location of the current United Methodist Church. In 1896, the Jarrettsville Creamery was started by several local businessmen, including Dr. Martin Luther Jarrett. It was the next property north of the current post office. In 1902, the fourth school for the village, referred to as the Jarrettsville Academy, was built on the same lot where the Brotherhood Circle Hall had stood. Later, it would be the lot for Varney Sinclair House that was converted to offices by Jarrettsville Federal Savings and Loan in 2019. That same year, Alexander Young Wooders bought the blacksmith shop and home of Charles Emrine at the intersection of Schuster and Norrisville Roads. The 1909 store that ended its life as Burcham's was started by Thomas E. Cathcart, but older locals will probably remember it as Harry Doughton's store. Burcham would buy Doughton stock in 1939. Daniel Edward Brookhart had a blacksmith shop at the corner of Federal Hill and Nelson Mill Roads in 1913. This painting was done by his grandson, Hayward Putnam. The Jarrettsville Trucking Company was started in 1920 to haul milk to Baltimore so that farmers did not have to take their product to the nearest train station. The business maintained an office at 1038 Hillen Street, just north of downtown Baltimore. Today, the address is a parking lot. Their later truck storage building still stands at Grimmel's Pond, just north of the village. In 1921, Charles Sinclair started selling automobiles from his father's farm on North Bend Road. The same year, Ida Grimmel purchased the prior Jarrettsville Creamery property, and her husband started Charles Grimmel and Sons. They originally sold coal, but their business evolved to hardware and lumber. Charles Bailey, William Varney, and Lester C. Sinclair started Sinclair Brothers Motor Company in 1922. They were located where the hotel stable had been in 1889, and later would house Harford Gas, which became Southern States, and the original pharmacy. The company of the brothers dissolved in 1932, with only Charles continuing the business. The 1925 death of Thomas Andrew Bay without a will led to a Bay family disagreement, and in 1926 the courts ordered the property sold to settle the estate. The buyer, a man named Anderson from Baltimore County, had the property surveyed into extremely small lots, and the west end of the village was forever changed. If you know John and Nancy Dorn at 3736 Norrisville Road, their house sits on the 4 highlighted lots. The Jarrettsville High School was constructed in 1926 as the 5th school to serve the village. It was the first brick building. It had 10 classrooms, a library, and a music room. In 1929, A. Wise Waters replaced his blacksmith shop with a state-of-the-art block building that still stands as Smith's Ace Hardware. It has one of the earliest elevators installed in Harford County. The original portico was removed well before my memory. The Jarrettsville Volunteer Fire Company was established in 1929. The first firehouse was the 1917 building where Greg's Driving School and the Studio H Salon are today. The fire company purchased the building in 1933. 1934 saw a major addition to the Jarrettsville High School that added an auditorium/gym, 3 more classrooms, and a principal's office. At this point, the Knights of Pythias Lodge was abandoned. In addition to school programs, the auditorium was used for the Jarrettsville Teen Club and was the location where the locals voted. Also in 1934, Calvary Emmy South, the frame building, burned, and in 1935 the church was rebuilt, this time out of stone. Today it still stands as Jarrettsville United Methodist Church. The pulpit furniture and railing were built in the third generation Kurtz Cabinet Shop on Baldwin Mill Road. Jarrettsville had a switchboard phone system from the turn of the 20th century. In 1939, Harford County, and specifically in Jarrettsville, got its first dial telephone system, and the 0-2 or the 692 exchange was born. Pictured left is Mary German, the last switchboard operator in Jarrettsville. After she was replaced by the Stroger step-by-step mechanical switch, Mary stayed on as the local C&P contact. Center, my Aunt Margaret McFadden Waters, worked for Mary right after graduating from Jarrettsville High School. Also pictured is Kurtz Fuller, who worked for the C&P Telephone Company. This picture was taken when the office was doubled in size around 1960. Charlie and Mary German's White House, which stood just west of Keene Dodge on the hilltop, later served as offices for Keene, but was eventually razed. Charles Sinclair purchased the lot on the northwest corner of the village square in 1938, and in 1941 he erected a new brick building. Today it's the main Keene Dodge location. In 1946, brothers Richard and Arthur Henderson started the Harford Gas Company in the building abandoned by Charles Sinclair. Ed Clary's paint shop was erected 3/4 of a mile south of the village square in 1948. Mechanical work was done in the flat roof building, and auto painting was done in the gable-ended building. In 1952, the hotel property was purchased by the Jarrettsville Building Association, the Federal Savings and Loan today. The hotel was salvaged by William Barlow and the lot subdivided. The result was the Jarrettsville Federal Savings and Loan Building, and in 1953, the Second Volunteer Fire Company Firehouse, which today is an annex to Keene Dodge. Howard Chester Burcham built a new store in 1958 that was raised for the Burcham Medical Center in 2006. Howard's nephew, Herb Jenkins, worked with Howard in both stores over several decades and was eventually a 49% owner. In 1958, the Jarrettsville Pharmacy was established in the north end of the Harford Gas Building, but Arnold and Elke Neuberger did not purchase the business until 1960. I worked for Doc Arnold from the fall of '63 to the fall of '65 at this location. In 1962, the post office was moved from the general store where Clarence Burton had been the longtime postmaster to the current post office building erected by George Grimmel specifically for that use. The Jarrettsville General Store stood on the southeast corner of the village square for 76 years. the store was razed in the fall of 1963. And in mid-December 1964, a Sinclair service station opened on the property. Even at this point, the property was still in Jarrett ownership. I worked for Bill Markley at this station in the summer of 1966. This 1967 Todd Holden photograph includes several locals. Left to right in the back row are Larry Johnson, Dick Boring, Dara McDaniels, who was the little girl that was the team mascot, Marvin Carr, Steve Sanneman, and Andy Moore. Kneeling are Harvey Gross, Jimmy Everett, Danny Everett, and George Gast. It was later converted to a gas and go, and today is a Carroll Fuels. In the background is the house of Mrs. Mary Henderson, the mother of Richard and Arthur. The house was originally part of the 2-acre general store lot. When Mrs. Henderson died, the property line between the store and the house had to be resurveyed to settle her estate. In 1973, Sinclair Motor Company bought and razed the home of Thomas Bond Jarrett on the northwest corner of the square to expand their parking lot. In my youth, this was an apartment house. In 1976, the 1842 Jarrett Manor was razed by Stanley Lloyd to make way for the 7-Eleven complex. This is a rare view of the backside of the house. At the end of its life, it housed Mogart's Antiques. The home of Dr. Martin Luther Jarrett was salvaged in 2010. It was the second house north of the square on the west side of Federal Hill Road. You may recall it as a dark brown shingled home. Dr. Jarrett had purchased the home in 1886, but had rented the property for several years prior to that. The Cathcart house, that at one point housed a doctor and a dentist, was the A.B. Henderson apartment house at the end of its life. The chestnut stairs and trim were salvaged, but the remainder was razed in 2018. In 2020, if Jarrettsville were to be renamed again, it would most certainly be Dodge City, as Keene has taken over Sinclair Motor Company, the German property, the second firehouse, the second Forest Hill, later PNC Bank, and the A.B. Henderson apartment house lot. Volume 2 is well underway. Since Volume 1 was released, new information on the fate of the Jarrettsville Hotel has come to light. It was salvaged and somewhat still stands as a private residence in Harford County, Election District 4. The hotel's parlor doors are now basement doors, and the steps to the hotel's second story now go to a basement. The bar is now a workshop bench, and the studding survived. What happened to the clapboard siding is not clear. While researching Cooptown, information on a petroleum pipeline for Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company and a postal system telegraph line has come to light. Research of Cooptown, the oldest village in the area, should be complete by the time this airs, and Federal Hill should at least be a work in progress. You can purchase the book at the Historical Society or from me. If you go to my webpage, washburn47.wix.com/Jarrettsville, you can view excerpts from every chapter and a complete index with about 1,000 names. The book is hardback and 238 pages. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed the program.
Ooh.
Well, thank you very much for a very informative history of one of the villages in Harford County, and probably one of the more prominent ones in Harford County. We have asked folks, and we invite folks to submit your questions about Jarrettsville, its history, and its families. If you'll do so by writing them in the chat section I'll ask them as we go along. Prior to this time, we did get a couple of questions. One is, you mentioned several log houses in the book. Are there any log houses still in existence in Jarrettsville? You're on mute.
Sorry. Well, I think I mentioned 4 different ones in the book. The first would have been the first school, and the second one, the second school. They're obviously both gone. One was on where the 7-Eleven is. The second is where the Jarrettsville Federal Savings and Loan is. Another one was on Nelson Mill Road. It was called Govins, and no, it's not still standing. The fourth one is, yes, it's down on Morris Road, and the gentleman that lives there is nice enough to have been sending me some pictures. There is a picture in the book, and it's a beautiful place. He's done a really great job with it.
Another question we got was very specifically, you talk about the Salem Church and Cemetery, particularly that the services there were done in German, and that it was served largely a German community. How much of an influence was German migration to the development of Jarrettsville?
Well, I don't know to the development of Jarrettsville. I mean, there are some very prominent names. Certainly Braden Ball has been long associated with it. Gross, which maybe is more of a Madonna name. Hilt. I can't really tell. I don't remember the rest of them. Bond. There was a Bond that lived up on Bond Road that runs from Old Federal Hill up to Old Federal Hill Road up to the Village of Federal Hill. There was actually a German guy there. He never became an American, and was actually interned as a foreign national in the war. Certainly between Gross and Braden Ball, it was certainly predominant families there.
What's now the McComas building was a Kurt's home, someone has said. And they think the original segment of it, when she's talking about the McComas building, are you talking about the McComas funeral home? Because I thought that you had said was a church originally.
It was.
Talk a little bit about that building. And
it was Asbury Church. I don't know whether any of it's log or not. That didn't come up in anything I did. Kurtz moved into the business in 1940. He moved the funeral home business there in 1940, but he had actually bought it a year or two ahead of that. I don't remember the exact date. It was originally smaller than that, and the money that he got from the sale of the land to J.C. Taylor for the marble works let them do an expansion. Actually, when J.C. Taylor bought the property, his deed included a clause in it that because it was next to the church and being sold by the church, that no liquor could ever be sold from that property. And supposedly, every succeeding deed was to include that clause too. Obviously, somewhere along the way, it went by the wayside.
Hey, Doug, what nationality was predominant in Jarrettsville?
Well, I guess I don't know the answer to that, Bill. Certainly, German, another German that was there was Shriver. If you know the houses, if you're familiar with the old families there, the Marstella House and the Denbo House that are just south of the cabinet shop, the houses in that area most of those were built by a guy named John Shriver, who was German, and he was part of the evangelical church. The oldest deeds that are talked about in the previous histories, they talk about Janet's, and he had 5 little properties, Janet's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, actual land patents. But he was described as a Frenchman that tried to grow wine, grow grapes to make wine. So other than the German and the French, I can't give you anything specific, Bill.
Okay, I have another question for you. Do we know if anyone was buried at Asbury and were they moved?
As far as I know, there was never any cemetery there. The cemetery that's north of the village would have been Emmy South originally. Asbury was Emmy. In the talk, I did say that Reverend Cathcart wanted it to be Methodist Protestant. Mrs. Cathcart wanted it to be a Methodist Episcopal, and their son Thomas wanted it to be a Methodist Episcopal South. Obviously, you can see who won that argument. But to the best of my knowledge, there was never any graveyard there, and were likely buried on the north side of town in the Emmy South lot.
Thank you. Was Daniel Scott a descendant of Aquila Scott of Bel Air?
No. There's a 5-generation list in the book, and the Daniel Scott that was in Jarrettsville was a 3rd generation. His son was Aquila, but he was not the Aquila Scott that owned the property that became Bel Air. That was Aquila Scott of James.
Okay, and I have 2 more questions. You mentioned the first hardware store in Jarrettsville having been established in 1890. Did the Eggleston start that hardware store, or had they sold the property to someone else?
No, Mr. Eggleston lived up into, I believe, the early 1940s. I mean, I was born in 47, and I think he had been dead a couple of years. But now he had the blacksmith shop there, and he had the hardware store there. And you almost have to wonder whether or not he started tinkering in the blacksmith shop, so he made hinges and such. And that's how he actually started the hardware business. But there's tons and tons and tons of advertisements of all the different kinds of stuff that not only Eggleston had in his hardware store, but the detail that was, I could dig up on Waters, A.Y. Waters. It was a phenomenal detail. I think the longest single story in the entire book is A.Y. Waters.
Yeah, and one last question. Can you talk more about the Jarrettsville property on North Furnace Road? What was the significance of that site? Also, assuming an actual furnace was on that road, where was it, if not on the Jarrettsville property?
No, it was considerably south. It's North Furnace Road, and it runs down to Furnace Road. The Jarrettsons live on the Gailey property. When in my youth, the pond was down the hill from them was all part of the Gailey property when I was young. Went there fishing a lot of times. It was a man-made pond put in for the fire company. I went squirrel hunting in the woods there for several years. The property that the Jarrettsons are on was called Quiet Inheritance. And Quiet Inheritance was very large. I don't remember the exact size of it, but I think it was more than 100 acres. And it extended all the way down to Furnace Road. Sarah Furnace is where the furnace was. There was a general store there. There was a school there. I don't remember the other buildings, but it was a whole little village unto itself. And that's how the road got its name. The Jarrettsons have a couple of acres out of that. Their property is actually on the very northern edge
of quiet inheritance. And it was built about 1864, as I recall. It's an old place.
Thank you. And a young lady left a message for us. There is a log house within the house located on Federal Hill Road. It is second from the corner of Nelson Mill and Federal Hill Road, north of Nelson Mill on the left. Wonderful
yes.
presentation. Thank you. I want your book. That is Rosalie Bavard.
Yeah, okay. Yes, that's true. That is another log house. That was the home of the Brookhart blacksmith. And yes, there is a log. I understand there's a log wall or log rooms that's still there. It was remodeled maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I'm going to say. I've never been inside of it. I was tempted to go when it was up for sale. But that was part of that was where the Brookharts lived when the blacksmith shop was on the corner. Actually, another log house in the area too that I didn't think about, and that's Smithson's Tavern. Now, I don't know whether it's the book Jarrettsville that talks about the trial of Martha Jane Cairns. She did such a good job of melding everything. It's really difficult to tell what's fact and what's fiction. Now, the murder was fact. The trial was fact. The fact that the jury only lasted 5 minutes before they acquitted her, that's all fact. There's no argument to that. But the rest of the story that surrounds that, she apparently had access to a lot of family papers. So probably most of that's factual, but I don't know what those parts got incorporated into the book. But supposedly, when Nicholas McComas was laid out, he was laid out in Smithson's Tavern. And Smithson's Tavern still stands just north of Old Federal Hill Road on Federal Hill. And it's certainly logged. It's got some beautiful log sections in it.
Thank you. That's all I have, Doug.
Oh, you talked about the popularity of the furniture made by the Kurtz cabinet makers.
Yep.
Do you know if any local families still have original cabinets? And I think we have a comment up above with a lady who said that she did have some of them. I also recall that the Historical Society may have some of the patterns that were used for the Kurtz by the Kurtz furniture makers. Do you know anything about that?
Don't know anything about the patterns. Arch and Millie still have a chest, and their kids still have. I think he has a sibling that has one. I don't know. I can't give any other specific families other than Arch. And not sure what else. Oh, now at the Historical Society, there is a miniature casket that was done by them, or at least thought to be done by them. That was on display in the table in the postmaster's office room there for a while.
Yeah, Richard and I just took that to the basement the other day.
Okay.
Oh, we have another. Somebody says yes, the Historical Society does have patterns from Kurtz. I actually remember when those were donated. It was in the early 2000s. What is now Danny Akers' home on Rock Ridge Road, is partially logged from the 1870s. It first belonged to Elizabeth Knopp.
Don't know the house.
You don't know the house, okay.
No. Knopp Road is off of Old Federal Hill. It's certainly an old section up there.
Another question, where was the original Jarrettsville High School? When did the students stop attending that school? And where did they go to when they stopped?
Okay, so the fourth school was the Jarrettsville Academy, but the diplomas from that school just said Jarrettsville High School. And I guess it was called an academy because it was partially state funded, county funded, and partially privately funded. So there was actually a charter for it. And so the money was kind of mixed. And I guess they chose to call it the Jarrettsville Academy. It was the fourth school. It was located where the red brick house is that Jarrettsville Federal just converted into offices within the last couple of years. It was built in 1902. They built the new brick high school where the current school is, or at least on that same property, in 1926. The kids were told to move the books and the desk and all that stuff from the academy building close to the village square up to the new high school. And supposedly the folklore, and there isn't very much folklore in this book, believe me, but the folklore for that is that the boys got done moving the furniture and the books, and they went up to Grimmel's Pond and ice skated, and they got wet. And they went back to the Jarrettsville Academy and started a fire in the stoves, and they let it get too hot, and it ignited the building after they left, and it actually burned the building on the same night, or the night before the fifth school opened. And I won't throw any names out. That's also part of the folklore.
So I left Jarrettsville Elementary School in like 1973. I moved to Harford County in 67. I went to Jarrettsville Elementary School. I started there in second grade. And sixth grade, we had to go to North Harford. And, that building still stands. They've made renovations to it. And North Harford began at grade 7 through 12. Can you give me any history on the late 60s of the Jarrettsville Elementary School?
Sure. So the fifth brick building, the fifth building, the first brick building, was a high school originally. It had a major addition in 34. Basically, the elementary was the first floor and the high school was the second floor, I think. In 1950, when North Harford was built, it was converted to be an elementary school. My mother graduated from it as a high school. I went to it as an elementary school. North Harford consolidated Slate Ridge, Highland, Jarrettsville, I can't remember what else, that were the other high schools around, other multi-year schools that were around. North Harford was built in 50. I went there, I think I started in 58. I graduated in 65. The elementary school basically stood where the current parking lot is for the sixth elementary school in the town. So basically the fifth school was ripped down, converted into a parking lot, and the new school was built in the date stamp says 1977.
Thank you.
So the Jarrettsville Academy was actually a first through probably 11th grade school?
Yeah, until North Harford opened, Everybody graduated in 11 grades. If you go back and you look at the really early student test, 7th grade was all it was required. And I don't think there's a lot of seniors or maybe even college kids that could pass a 7th grade test from the 1880s or 90s. I'm not sure I could without thinking about it. And so 8, 9, 10, and 11 constituted high school.
Mm-hmm.
When North Harford started, they converted to a 12-year system. As a sidelight, because it's not in the book, but maybe people might enjoy it. If you didn't grow up in Harford County, the seniors, when they first started the bus system, it was actually horse-drawn carriages, and it started down here on 80 Road at Mine Branch. And it was actually, kids would drive the cart and pick up the other kids along the way. Well, that idea carried over when the yellow school buses for North Harford ran up through 1958. Seniors drove them, not adults, seniors. And and even when I was going to high school, there was a rifle range in the bottom of Jarrettsville Addition, and down in the basement of the 1934 addition was a cafeteria and a rifle range. And when North Harford was built, there was a rifle range. I mean, we had kids getting on the bus with 22s all the time. It was nothing unusual about it. I mean, people would have a cow with it today.
Yeah, that was still active when I went to North Harford.
Well, there were farm boys. You had to know how to shoot the fox and the groundhogs and stuff in the barnyard.
Who began the Jarrettsville Truck Company, and how long did that business run?
I'd have to look up the dates. It started in 20. I don't remember how long or live on was the last secretary treasurer. Who ran it? So if you knew McDaniel, the dentist in Towson, his father was a McDaniel that lived about where the chainsaw tractor place is there next to the Jarrettsville Deli, Creamery and Deli. Their house was in about that area. So he was the main truck driver. McDaniel was the main truck driver, but he was a part owner. Tipton was huge in it. Actually, the building where the trucks were stored, that came off the Tipton farm. The Jarrettsville Cemetery came off of the Tipton farm. That's the two names that come to mind, is Tipton and McDaniels.
Do you know, we have a question about a specific teacher, a Miss Jen Smith, who taught at the Jarrettsville High School. She was an English teacher married to Roy Smith, who then lived in the Kurtz Smith house.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that's where she lived, but yes, I remember her. She was still there when I was going. I graduated with two Smith girls, both Suzanne. What we called one Susie and the other one Suzanne. And the teacher, Miss Smith, was an aunt to one of them. And I can't tell you, I don't remember which one it was, to tell you the truth anymore. There's a decent list of teacher names in the book. I had Helen Cooper in the first grade, Helen Richardson in the second, Mrs. Wiley in the third, Mrs. Lipscomb in the fourth, Bonnie Woods in the fifth, and Mrs. Gregory in the sixth. I'll give you another story about Jarrettsville Elementary. So by the time I went there, the 1934 edition was made. And Mrs. Gregory's classroom, was right on the backside of the auditorium gym. And with permission, we used to get out on the roof of the auditorium gym and put up little weather vanes and thermometers and all this kind of stuff for weather stations. Once again, today, you'd have a cow with your kid climbing on the roof.
I've heard that story about other schools in Harford County as well.
There was a lot of stuff that happened. Up here in Cardiff, my wife went to Slate Ridge. If you know the Green Marble Mine on Green Marble Road, science class, they used to walk the kids down to the Green Marble Mine, put them in the same wire cages as the miners would get into, and lower them down in the mine. And that was a science class project. You couldn't do that today either.
Wouldn't even send the men down in that.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Well, that's all the questions that we've had. If anyone would like to mention something in chat, we can relay that to Doug, or in the Q&A, which is at the footer of the Zoom meeting, the Zoom webinar. We can continue, and Jackie has some finishing things.
It doesn't look like we have a lot more messages, so I'll go ahead and wrap this up. And we certainly hope you've enjoyed this presentation on the history of Jarrettsville. If you're interested in more information on the history of Northern Harford County, you can read the Harford Historical Bulletin articles that are authored by Doug Washburn. As I said at the beginning, it includes two on the 1- and 2-room schools of Northern Harford County. Part 1 is on Election District 5. Part 2 is on Election District 4. And then volumes 101 and 102 are on the colored schools of Harford County, separate but equal. Doug has written and published 2 other books. One we've talked extensively about, On the Road from Jarrettsville, Volume 1 today, but he has also written A History of Pilesville, Harford County. He did that in 2014. You can purchase copies of the Jarrettsville book and other publications on Harford County history through the Society's bookstore on our website. The Pilesville book is in limited supply, but if you send an email through the Society webpage, we'll forward it to Doug so that he can respond to it. We also invite you to join us next Tuesday, November the 10th, for a virtual event on writing your own memoir. You may register for the November 10th event through our website, www.harfordhistory.org. Consider submitting your own memoir to the Historical Society and preserve your own memories of these historic times for those who come after us. Thank you, and please join us again.